Welcome to this edition of DIY3DTech.com. In this episode, we're going to take a look at cutting this out on the laser. So what is this? This is a sanitary wipe holder that we're going to cut out of acrylic for the utility room. So the idea is we'll have a couple mounts here for the pegboard. So typical pegboard's about 1 inch on center, so we've spaced these out about 6 inches, and this is going to be a little bit proud of that. And the idea is we'll have a top piece with a canister we'll slide into, and obviously a bottom piece to support it, and then flanking sides, a left and a right, to provide additional support to the bottom. The idea is we'll cut this out of about 2.5 millimeter acrylic, and then kind of glue it up with some acrylic adhesive. So just want to talk about a few basic design tips here. So one of the big design tips is keep in mind one of the things that the laser is actually going to cut both sides of this line. So this is one of the reasons I've used a rather narrow line to minimize the curve. Now this is both your enemy and your friend, because it is going to make the hole larger, and instead of scaling the hole, what I've done is ensure that the hole is actually just a slight bit larger than my tab that goes in it, because again, I'm going to glue this up, so I'd rather have a little bit of extra room rather than a little bit less room. And that also goes for the sides here, because as you can see, my edges here to here are just a fraction of an inch proud, and when it cuts it out, the laser cuts the outside of the line, the curve will create about a 0.2 millimeter curve, so I'll gain about 0.2 on each side, so to give me a little bit of wiggle room, and I kind of want that, because the intention of this design is not to be pressure fit so much as it is to fit together and be glued up with some acrylic adhesive. So that's a little bit of a tip in working with that. Be cognizant of that. The other thing that I want to point out is when you're working with thin areas, for example, like we have up here and here, because if these get too close to the edge, when the laser is cutting the outer curve, it tends to melt this area just because it's obviously getting hot and it can't sink or dissipate that heat. So be careful how close to the edge you get. Actually, I was a little bit closer. I wanted to be a little bit prouder in the size of the circle. And I got a little close to the edge in the first design, and I had to back this off a little bit to prevent it from burning through. So just kind of a little bit of another tip to help that along. Now, the one thing I did do to speed this up is I utilized the same set of tabs both vertically and horizontally, and this allowed me to cheat a little bit, and because when I added these, and even these two are simply two of these four, it connected over here by going up to path and doing a union, as you can see here, and that's what I did across the board. Now the one thing with this means it's not going to be perfectly symmetric. It is going to be asymmetric. What does this mean? This means you'll have a left and a right, you'll have a top, and you'll have a bottom. Now, one of the things I do after I cut this out, I kind of dry fit it, and then I put a piece of masking tape on it indicating left, right, up, and down. So when I go to assemble these, it's a little bit faster, because when you're working with the adhesive, especially acrylic adhesive, it dries almost instantaneously. So you want to make sure you got everything in the right spot before you go to do that, or you're going to waste about $10 in plastic. So kind of critical piece going through and doing that. I've used the rounded corners, the box rounded corners function of Inkscape to provide some nice relief on the edges. I've squared them up here for rigidity, so just a couple points there. Outside of that, it's a pretty simple design. Now, the other piece I did do is I did break these up into 4 different pieces. So top, back, bottom, and then 2 sides. It's 4 different SVGAs after doing my design here, so I could cut them out, because I typically used about a 10 by 10 inch sheet of acrylic to cut these from, that I cut down from a larger 24 by 24 piece of acrylic to fit in the machine easier. So anyways, just kind of if you have like a standard 40-watt K40 machine, just kind of another tip to be able to break it up. So do your alignment in one big drawing, and then break them up, and then distribute them to smaller SVGs. And then I simply imported it into Corel Laser and then cut from there. So tell you what, let's hop over to the bench and let's kind of take a look at the end product and see how it all works out. Okay, Welcome back. So in the computer we took a look in Inkscape at designing this, and now we've cut it out and I've got it laid out here. In the upper corner I'm going to place some time lapse of this being cut out. It's not that exciting, but it is kind of interesting, so we'll run it up there and while I talk about it. Now, one of the pieces I do have to fess up, and again, a big part of these videos are the learning experience. And as part of this learning experience, I violated Norm Abrams' #1 law. That is, measure twice, cut once. So, because actually when I designed this, if you remember in Inkscape, I used 2.4 millimeter acrylic. And that was my original intention, is to use the 2.4 millimeter acrylic. And when I went to do it, I cut out the first piece and I realized I didn't have enough cut sheets for this, so I had a bunch of this white stuff that was already cut. So I decided, hey, what the heck, I'll just cut it out of that instead. Well, it turns out it's a little bit thicker than the 2.4. It's almost 3 millimeters, and so it's a little bit off, but it's close enough. It'll work because I'm going to epoxy it up anyway, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I just kind of want to share that. Double check your material thickness. Even though it really looks the same and sort of feels the same, it's not the same. So point number one. The other point I wanted to share with you guys is this. So you notice this piece up here, and you notice this piece. So this was my original design, is I had it a little bit larger for the cylinder to set into for the Lysol container, and you notice up here it was too thin, so when it came through and cut, it actually melted this between the inner cut and the outer cut. So I had to go back and actually scale it down a little bit more because I wanted to leave some room in here. I really had to take that away unless I wanted to make this piece bigger, and then if I made this piece bigger, then I had to make this piece down here bigger, and it was easier just to make that a little bit smaller and tighter. So let's hope they don't increase the size of the Lysol container anytime soon. I doubt that, but this is also a good point to think about. I didn't think about in the design of it. Is when you're cutting something really thin, it's not like a CNC because it's obviously getting very hot. In a CNC, this probably would have been okay, but obviously in this case it wasn't. So learning experience there. So a couple of learning experiences there. Now the next thing is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to assemble this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to epoxy it. I'm going to use some 5-minute epoxy, instant gratification. Why am I using epoxy instead of the acrylic stuff that fuses it together? Because this is a little bit brittle material, and if joining it with that stuff, I forget what the name of it is off the top of my head, it means that the joints will be somewhat brittle too. Now what's going to happen is people are going to take wipes out of here, then press the lid back down on top of this. It's going to take a fair amount of force, and this junction, especially down here at the bottom, will be somewhat brittle, and this is what's going to take most of the impact, is this piece sitting in here as well as these pieces holding some of the vertical tension. By filling this in, not really filling this, well, somewhat filling it in, but by utilizing epoxy, at least this is my opinion, what will happen is it will give me some extra resiliency and also a little bit of filleting in the gaps down here and on the sides especially, to take some of that extra force and distribute that extra force a little bit differently. So we'll see how it goes. This is sort of my opinion, it's sort of a build tip, and we'll see how it works out. So I'm going to go and I'm going to glue this all together, epoxy it together, and then we'll take a look at it, because I'm not going to bore you with me epoxying it. I think you guys can figure that piece out. And then by the magic of video, we'll be right back. Okay, here we are. We have it all glued up and stuck on the pegboard with a wipes container in it. So it's come out okay. Again, I don't think this is the best piece I've done, And one of the biggest reasons is in the last segment, as you saw, when I ended up cutting this out, I was originally going to cut it out about 2.5 millimeter plastic, and I ended up on 3, so I didn't get the best alignment, but I was able to kind of cheat with a little bit of glue and epoxy. So I made it work, and it's in the utility room here, so I'm not going to sweat it too much, and I didn't want to waste $10 worth of acrylic. However, the idea came out very well, and you can notice the hooks on the pegboard. This is on 1-inch centers, so it actually works out pretty good. I'm not sure what the European standard is for pegboard, but anyways, here in the US, that's what I've got it set up for, and I'm just using standard hooks, and it's come out pretty well. And again, it takes a lot of force. Again, you can open this up and pull one out. I'm pressing down on it, and it's pretty resilient. I think far more so than a 3D printed part would be. So all in all, I think this has come out pretty good. So I've been happy with it, so I'm going to give it a thumbs up. And hey, if you found it interesting, give it a thumbs up too. Also, don't forget to subscribe when the button comes up over there. And if you already subscribed, many thanks. Don't forget the swag shop up in the corner. And hey, we'll see you in the next video. Comments below. Cheers.
Please click like below and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date on all of our projects.